Hello, welcome back. We are starting part six, and part six is entitled Who is Gatsby? If you'll remember, up until now, we've heard some rumors. We've heard that he was a German spy in the war. We heard that he was in the American Army. We've heard that he was the related to the German emperor. I can't think of his name. He told, well, supposedly, Jordan said that he said he was an Oxford man. But anyway, we don't know. We don't have some concrete evidence of who this guy is. Nick has said people his age don't just show up with all this money in the world, just suddenly without anybody knowing them. So we're going to start on page 61, and it's called Who is Gatsby? On Sunday morning, while church bells rang in the villages along shore, the world and its mistress returned to Gatsby's house and twinkled hilariously on his lawn. He's a bootlegger, said one of the young ladies, moving somewhere between his cocktails and his flowers. One time he killed a man who he found out was nephew to von Hindenburg and second cousin to the devil. Reach me a rose, honey, and pour me that last drop of that there crystal glass. Okay, so I want you to add this to the rumors. He's a bootlegger. That would answer why he has all this money. Him being, related to the German emperor, or someone finding out that he's, the nephew to von Hindenburg and second cousin. Yeah, so anyway, mark those two more rumors, okay? Once I wrote down on the empty spaces of a timetable the names of those who came to Gatsby's house that summer. It is an old timetable now, disintegrating at its folds, but it's headed, this schedule effect July 5th, 1922. But I can still read the gray names, and they will give you a better impression than my generalities of those who accepted Gatsby's hospitality and paid him the subtle tribute of knowing nothing whatsoever about him. Okay, so I marked that this is where he writes down there are all these people that came, that he met, I guess, that came to the parties at Gatsby's house that summer. The only thing that you don't need to memorize any of these names. They're never going to be mentioned again. As I read them, I just want you to listen to the different types of maybe where they're from or the types of businesses and things like that, okay? From East Egg, then came the Chester Beckers of the Leaches, and a man named Bunsen, whom I knew at Yale, and Dr. Webster Civet, who was drowned last summer up in Maine. Also, let me tell you this, I'm not going to pronounce these correctly, and that's fine. We don't need necessarily to, like I said, to know any of these. Just kind of listen, and I'm just going to move through it, especially if I can't pronounce it. And the Hornbeams and the Willie Voltaires and a whole clan named Black Buck, who always gathered in a corner and flipped up their noses like goats at whoever came near. And the Ismays and the Christies, or rather Hubert Albach and Mr. Christie's wife, and Edgar Beaver, whose hair, they say, turned cotton white one winter afternoon for no good reason at all. Clarence Endive was from East Egg, as I remember. He came only once in white knickerbockers and had a fight with a bum named Eddie in the garden. From further out on the island came the Cheadles and the O.R.P. Schraders and the Stonewall Jackson Abrams of Georgia and the Fishguards and the Ripley Snells. Snell was there 3 days before he went into the penitentiary, so drunk out on the gravel drive that Mrs. Ulysses Sweat's automobile ran over his right hand. The Danceys came too, and S.B. Whitebait, who was well over 60, and Maurice A. Flink, and the Hammerheads, and Beluga, the tobacco importer, and Beluga's girls. Okay, so those are all the people that came from East Egg, okay? From West Egg came the Poles and the Mulreadys and the Cecil Roebuck and the Cecil Schoen and Gulick, the state senator, and Newton Orchard, who controlled films par excellence, and Eckhost and Clyde Cohen and Don S. Schwartz, the son, and Arthur McCarty, all connected with the movies in one way or another. All the Catlips and the Bambergs and G. Earl Muldoon, brother to that Muldoon who afterwards strangled his wife, Da Fontano, the promoter, came there, and Ed Legros and James B. Rotgut Ferret, and the DeLongs and Ernest Lilly. They came to gamble, and when Ferret wandered into the garden, it meant he was cleaned out and associated traction would there have to fluctuate profitably the next day. Okay, so if you'll notice that the people from East Egg don't have necessarily their how they earned their money, because remember, East Egg, they didn't earn their money. It was just given to them. The West Eggers are gamblers, or they work in the film industry, or they talk about, the things like that, the way that they are, how they're rich. Okay. I would mark this. We are going to hear about Klipspringer a little bit later, so remember this about Klipspringer. Maybe just an asterisk right here. A man named Klipspringer was there so often and so long that he became known as the boarder. I doubt if he had any other home. So he would go there for like a party, but then stay there throughout the week. Gatsby didn't care. He had all this room. And then so he would just be there for the next party. He does happen to play the piano, so I guess that's kind of why Gatsby's cool that he's there. He kind of entertains them sometimes. But they refer to him as the boarder. They don't even know where he lives. Theatrical people, there were Gus Ways and Horace O'Donovan and Lester Meyer and George Duckweed and Francis Bull. Also from New York, there were the Chromes and the Backheisens and the Denekers and the Russell Beatty and the Corrigans and the Kelleher's and the Dewars and the Scullys and the S.W. Belcher and the Smirks and the Young Quinns, divorced now, and Henry H. Palmetto, who killed himself by jumping in front of a subway train in Times Square. Benny McLennan arrived always with 4 girls. They were never quite the same ones in physical person, but they were so identical one with another, it inevitably seemed that they had been there before. I've forgotten their names. Jacqueline, I think, or else Consuela, or Gloria, or Judy, or June. And their last names were either the melodious names of flowers and months, and the sterner ones of the great American capitalists, whose cousins, if pressed, they would confess themselves to be. So I like that Benny always comes with 4 girls. They're never quite the same ones, but they kind of all are the exact type of girls. In addition to all these, I can remember that Faustina O'Brien came there at least once, and the Baedeker girls and young Brewer, who had his nose shot off in the war, and Mr. Albroxberger and Miss Hang, his fiance, and Ardita Fitzpeters and Mr. P. Jewett, once head of the American Legion, and Miss Claudia Hip, with a man reputed to be her chauffeur, and a prince of something who we called Duke, and whose name, if I ever knew it, I have forgotten. All these people came to Gatsby's house that summer. Now, obviously, there were lots more, but they weren't necessarily someone with whom Nick would have known their name. They didn't have any prestige or notoriety. At 9 o'clock one morning late in July, Gatsby's gorgeous car lurched up the rocky drive to my door and gave out a burst of melody from its 3-noted horn. It was the first time he had called on me, though I had gone to 2 of his parties, mounted in his hydroplane, and at his urgent invitation made frequent use of his speech. So he's never actually come to like invited him somewhere like just those 2. He's been to some of his parties, and so they don't really have the type of, a relationship as like friends. It's just kind of like neighbors. Good morning, old sport. You're having lunch with me today, and I thought we'd ride up together. He was balancing himself on the dashboard of his car with that resourcefulness of movement that is so peculiarly American, that comes, I suppose, with the absence of lifting work or rigid sitting in youth, and even more with the formless grace of our nervous, sporadic games. This quality was continually breaking through his punctilious manner in the shape of restlessness. He was never quite still. There was always a tapping foot somewhere or an impatient opening and closing of a hand. Okay, so he has this way about him. He's leaned up against the car like to talk to him, but it's almost like he's trying too hard to look relaxed. He's trying too hard to look cool. There's always something not quite still about him. It could be like him moving his hands. It could be like the tapping of a foot. He saw me looking with admiration at his car. It's pretty, isn't it, old sport? He jumped off to give me a better view. Haven't you ever seen it before? I'd seen it. Everybody had seen it. It was a rich cream color, bright with nickel, swollen here and there in its monstrous length, with triumphant hat boxes and supper boxes and toolboxes, and terraced with a labyrinth of windshields that mirrored a dozen suns. Sitting down behind many layers of glass, it is a sort of green leather conservatory we started to town. So it's a really nice car. It's yellowish, it's kind of cream colored. And of course, Gatsby's proud of it. And he's like, you've seen it before, haven't you? And he's like, of course, we've all seen it. We know whose car it is. It's nice. Okay, so remember, there's a mystery about Gatsby. Nick really doesn't know what to believe. He's heard these rumors. He's heard, these things that people who go to his parties just sit around and talk about them, but they don't really know for sure. And so we're going to see if the mystery is, relieves, or if there's still going to be more of a mystery. I had talked with him perhaps 6 times in the past month and found, to my disappointment, that he had little to say. So my first impression, that he was a person of some undefined consequence, had gradually faded, and he had become simply the proprietor of an elaborate roadhouse next door. So when he gets into the car this day to ride up to town, he doesn't really find anything mysterious about him. Because he's talked to him, but I don't know, he's just kind of like dull. He's just a guy. So the mysteries kind of disappeared. And then came that disconcerting ride. So we're going to see what happens. We hadn't reached West Egg Village before Gatsby began leaving his elegant sentences unfinished and slapping himself indecisively on the knee of his caramel-colored suit. Look here, old sport, he broke out surprisingly. What's your opinion of me anyhow? A little overwhelmed, I began the generalized evasions with which that question deserves. Well, I'm going to tell you something about my life, he interrupted. I don't want you to get the wrong idea of me from all those stories that you hear. And so I wrote in the margin, oh, so he does know that people, just are saying all these things about him and all these rumors. I kind of expected that he didn't, but he is aware that people are not sure who he is and what's true. So, and then he writes, so he was aware of the bizarre accusations that flavored conversations in his halls. I'll tell you God's truth. His right hand suddenly ordered divine retribution to stand by. I am the son of some wealthy people in the Middle West, all dead now. I was brought up in America, but educated at Oxford, because all of my ancestors have been educated there for many years. It is a family tradition. Okay, so right here, I put in, write it in the side of my book. Gatsby tells Nick the truth about his past. He says, I had all my people, they were very wealthy in the Middle West. They died. He did, he was educated at Oxford. And so that's the truth. He looked at me sideways, and I knew why Jordan Baker had believed he was lying. He hurried the phrase educated at Oxford, or swallowed it, or choked on it, as though it had bothered him before. And with this doubt, the whole statement fell to pieces, and I wondered if there wasn't something a little sinister about him after all. So Nick says there's something about the way he said it. He thinks he's lying. He doesn't necessarily believe, that his people are from the Middle West, wealthy, that what he said, okay? What part of the Middle West? I inquired casually. San Francisco. I see. Okay, so y'all seen a map, right? Is San Francisco in the Middle West? No, it's on the Pacific Ocean, like literally like the farthest, west on that part of California. It's not middle. Then Gatsby goes on to say, my family all died and I came into a good deal of money. His voice was solemn, as if the memory of that sudden extinction of a clan still haunted him. For a moment, I suspected that he was pulling my leg, but a glance at him convinced me otherwise. After that, I lived like a young Rajah in all the capitals of Europe, Paris, Venice, Rome, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game, painting a little, things for myself only, and trying to forget something very sad that had happened to me long ago. So you're going to have a question that says, what did he do before, or what does he do when his family died? And so you need to note that he, searches for, collects jewels, mainly rubies. He hunts big game. Excuse me. He paints a little, things for himself. Okay. He says he's trying to forget the fact that he lost his family. With an effort, I managed to restrain my incredulous laughter. Nick still isn't buying it. He's very skeptical. The very phrases were worn so threadbare that they evoked no image except for of a turbaned character leaking sawdust at every pore as he pursued a tiger through, and I can't pronounce that. He doesn't believe him. He says, oh, he's telling the story, and he's told it so much that it doesn't even sound true. Okay? Then came the war, old sport. It was a great relief, and I tried very hard to die. But I seemed to bear an enchanted life. I accepted a commission as first lieutenant when the war began. In the Aragon Forest, I took 2 machine gun detachments so far forward that there was a half-mile gap on either side of us where the infantry couldn't advance. We stayed there 2 days and 2 nights, 130 men with 16 Lewis guns. And when the infantry came up at last, they found the insignia of 3 German divisions among the piles of the dead. I was promoted to be a major, and every Allied government gave me a decoration. Even Montenegro, little Montenegro down the Adriatic Sea. So now he says, while he did all this stuff before he went to war thinking, well, maybe I'll die. And he said that would have been a relief. He was very sad, but he did really well in the war. He didn't mean to, but he did. And he saved all these men, and he did, he was promoted, and they even decorated him. And he says, even Montenegro, little Montenegro, he lifted up the words and nodded at them with his smile. The smile comprehended Montenegro's troubled history and sympathized with the brave struggles of the Montenegrin people. It appreciated fully the chain of national circumstances which had elicited this tribute from the Montenegro's warm little heart. My incredulity, which is skepticism, was submerged in fascination now. It was like skimming hastily through a dozen magazines. So while Nick still doesn't believe him, he's still very skeptical. It's almost like he wants to hear more. He's really intrigued. He's like, what is this guy going to say next? I don't believe what he's saying, but I want to continue to hear it. Okay. He reached into his pocket, and a piece of metal slung on a ribbon fell into my palm. That's the one from Montenegro. To my astonishment, the thing had an authentic look. So he takes out a medal, like, they're decorated with medals. He has it with him, and he hands it to Nick, and Nick's like, okay, so I don't believe you. However, this kind of looks real. Orderi di something in probably Latin or Italian, I don't know, ran the circular legend. Montenegro, Nicholas Rex. Turn it. Major J. Gatsby, I read, for valor extraordinary. So he has this medal, and this is proof that he was in the war and that Montenegro decorated him with his medal. So what is Nick going to do now? Now, nowadays, we can go on Google and we can find a fake medal and we can do all that. We can even engrave it. Back then, no, this wasn't a possibility. If they had the actual medal and it has his name on it, and, Nicholas Rex, the leader of Montenegro, Nick's kind of like, okay, hold up. Here's another thing I always carry, a souvenir of Oxford days. It was taken in Trinity Quad. The man on my left is now the Earl of Doncaster. It was a photograph of half a dozen young men in blazers loafing in an archway through which were a visible host of spires. There was Gatsby, looking a little, not much younger, with a cricket bat in his hand. So he has the medal as proof that he was in the war, that he was decorated by Montenegro. And then he has a picture of him at Oxford. And again, there's no Photoshop during these days. There's no trying to, it's him. He can see it. And so Nick is really confused now. He's like, so hold up. You're being serious? Like, what you're telling me is actually true? Because he has 2 pieces of proof here. Okay. That's going to be one of your, some of your questions that are going to be asked. Okay. Like, what is his proof? Then it was all true. I saw the skins of tigers flaming in the palace on the Grand Canal. I saw him opening a chest of rubies to ease with their crimson lighted depths and the gnawings of his broken heart. So he believes him now. He sees that big game that he was hunting and he sees those rubies and he's like, oh my goodness. And then Gatsby says, I'm going to make a big request of you today, he said, pocketing his souvenirs with satisfaction. So I thought you ought to know something about me. I didn't want you to think that I was just some nobody. You see, I usually find myself among strangers because I drift here and there trying to forget the sad thing that happened to me. He hesitated. You'll hear about it this afternoon. Okay, so underline the fact that he says the reason he told him this stuff is because he doesn't want him. He says, I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody. So name and background and money and things like that, this is important to Gatsby. And he's assuming it's important to Nick. He thinks that because he's going to request something of Nick. And if Nick doesn't, think that Gatsby is important enough, that Nick won't do it. So he says, that's the reason I've told you that, because I'm going to make a request. And so Nick says, at lunch? No, this afternoon. I happen to find out that you're taking Miss Baker to tea. Do you mean to say that you're in love with Miss Baker? No, old sport, I'm not. But Miss Baker has kindly consented to speak to you about this matter. Okay, so his first idea is, I know you're taking Jordan to tea. And so Nick first says, oh my goodness, are you in love with Miss Baker? Because he's just started this relationship with her. And Gatsby's like, no. But I found out you guys, knew each other. So she's going to be the one to request something on my behalf. A little weird. Okay, little like, why can't you just ask me right now? And so Nick is kind of, feeling kind of annoyed by this. I hadn't the faintest idea what this matter was, but I was more annoyed than interested. I hadn't asked Jordan to tea in order to discuss Mr. J. Gatsby. And I was sure the request would be something utterly fantastic. And for a moment, I was sorry I'd ever set foot on his overpopulated lawn. This, where the way he uses fantastic is not like how we say, oh my goodness, this is fantastic. He means like something really out of the ordinary and something that's probably going to be just ridiculous. And so he's like, he wouldn't say another word. His correctness grew on him as we neared the city. We passed Port Roosevelt, where there was a glimpse of a red-belted ocean-going ships, and sped along a cobbled slum line with the dark, undeserted saloons of the faded gilt 1900s. Then the Valley of Ashes opened up out on both sides of us, and I had a glimpse of Mrs. Wilson straining at the garage pump with a panting vitality as we went by. Remember, I told you, in order to leave, either the eggs and get into the city, you have to go through the Valley of Ashes, okay? Even Gatsby. With fenders spread like wings, we scattered light through half Astoria. Only half, for as we twisted among the pillars of the elevated, I heard the familiar jug-jug spat of a motorcycle, and a frantic policeman rode alongside. All right, old sport, called Gatsby. We slowed down. Taking a white card from his wallet, he waved it before the man's eyes. So the cop is trying to get him to pull over. Well, they slow down, and he takes something out of his pocket. It's just a white card. Nick doesn't necessarily know what it is, but he shows it to the policeman. The policeman sees it and he says, right you are, agreed the policeman, tipping his cap. I'll know you next time, Mr. Gatsby. Excuse me. What was that? I inquired. The picture of Oxford? I was able to do the commissioner a favor once, and he sends me a Christmas card every year. Okay, so before we move on, we don't know what that card said, but it somehow got Gatsby out of trouble. Okay, he was speeding or what have you, and the cop was going to, pull him over, maybe give him a ticket, see what's going on. But he sees, and it tells the police officer who he is. And immediately the police officer says, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was you, Mr. Gatsby. I'll know you next time. Basically, have a good day. So Nick just kind of assumes that it's this picture of Oxford. It's not. But Gatsby explains, I was able to do the commissioner, which is like the police commissioner, a favor, and he sends me a Christmas card every year. What can we infer about Gatsby here? Most likely the fact that he is pretty much above the law. Okay, whatever he does for a living, however he's made his money, he's got some people in his pocket, and namely some people in the law that are higher up. So definitely he can pretty much do what he wants to do. Okay, if he has the commissioner, whatever that card said, if he has the commissioner telling the police officers to, to let him just keep going, he's definitely above the law. That's a good inference that we can make. Okay. Over the Great Bridge, with the sunlight through the girders making a constant flicker upon the moving cars, with the city rising up across the river in white heaps and sugar lumps, all built with the wish out of non-olfactory money. The city seen from the Queensboro Bridge was always the city seen for the first time, in its first wild promise of all the mystery and the beauty of the world. So they're going into, the city, and he's kind of like, Nick is, forever using these, words of imagery that are like creating, how he's seeing it. A dead man passed us in a hearse heaped with blooms, followed by 2 carriages with drawn blinds, and by more cheerful carriages for friends. The friends looked out at us with the tragic eyes and the short upper lips of Southeastern Europe, and I was glad that the sight of Gatsby's splendid car was included in their somber holiday. That was my Gatsby shaking his collar, sorry. As we crossed Blackwell's Island, a limousine passed us, driven by a white chauffeur, in which sat 3 modish Negroes, 2 bucks and a girl. I laughed aloud as the yolks of their eyeballs rolled toward us in a haughty rivalry. Okay, so this is unusual for the period, okay, because this is not when, this is pre civil rights and things like that. So it's unusual to see that the white man driving the African Americans, okay? Anything can happen now that we've slid over the bridge, I thought. Anything at all. Even Gatsby could happen without any particular wonder. Okay, so that is the end of part 6. Possibly we've heard, we now know who Gatsby is. Nick definitely has some added, some of the intrigue is gone. He knows that, he was in the war. He's seen the medal. He knows that how he got his money now. So Gatsby definitely has an ally. And he felt like he needed to have that ally because he's going to get Jordan to ask Nick a favor this afternoon. Why can't Gatsby just ask Nick right now? You'll have to for part 7. Just kidding. I hate it when they do that on TikTok. You're going to get part 7 regardless of whether you like this or not. Later.